Parking. Okay, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Margie MacDonald, who will moderate our first panel on generational superpowers. Margie served 12 years in the Montana legislature. Originally from Glendive, Margie retired from a career as a community organizer and nonprofit administrator, including Montana Association of Churches Executive Director, Montana Northern Plains Resource Council Staff Director, and Western Organization of Resource Council's Regional Organizer. She was Governor Schweitzer's Office of Community Service Director. Margie is a former Big Sky 55 Plus Executive Director, and she was our lobbyist in the 2023 and 2025 legislative sessions. Margie.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay in back? All right. That we think about a lot, and that I think a lot about a lot, is how different generations are along the river in very different places. So I grew up on the Yellowstone River, way out in eastern Montana. My family had a home, and you would see all the things go by. But when I think about my children's generation or the neighbors and friends that I know, I realize that they're at a very different place. The river and the community is very different in terms of when they were born and when they grew up and the world that they experienced. And sometimes that can be a source of division. Sometimes it's a source of a superpower. But one of the things that both Representative Cunningham and I were noticing this year, I think particularly as the crunch time came in the legislature, was there was a real sense of pitting us against one another around the limited finances of the state of Montana and the very serious and real and urgent needs of the very young and the very old, and a lot of people in between who need health care or affordable housing. And one of the things that we're convinced of, and as our chair, Terry, alluded to, is that one of the ways we forge and win on all of our issues is by building partnerships and coalitions and getting together, because that's where we have power. That's where we win elections. That's where we convince lawmakers that it's abundance, not scarcity, and that when they invest in the littlest, it benefits the whole community. So we have asked some wise and wonderful people to join us today and help us kind of think together collectively about our superpowers, about the things that might divide us, about the ways in which we can reach out and build relationships and honor and recognize the strengths of one another and appreciate the place in the river that individuals are coming from. So I'm pleased and proud to introduce our first panelist, and then I'll go ahead after that, after each panelist completes their presentation, and introduce the next one. But we're kind of going up the stair steps, and Sofie Wright is pinch hitting today. So not only is she our operations associate, she is also a really accomplished and intelligent and capable young woman who is just entering the workforce, having graduated from Carroll College this last spring. She has worked with candidates through the Montana Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee cycle and the 2024 cycle. She was on the staff for the Montana legislature in the 2025 session, and we share her with someone that we often do find ourselves in partnership with, Rafe Graybill's law firm, which has done, I don't know how many times they have defended our Constitution in the last 5 years, but they have a track record that's pretty impressive in protecting Montana's constitutional rights. So Sofie gets to see that work, but she also gets to work with us, and she's going to reflect for us where she is on the journey, what the superpowers are of the gen that she is a part of, and with that, I'll just hand it over to Sofie.
Hello, can you hear me? Perfect. I'm Sofie. I get the great pleasure of working with our wonderful staff and board, and also working with all of you guys, our members. I just recently got this job actually right out of college, which is a very interesting time in your life when you're a young adult and you're entering the job workforce, which can be quite daunting, right? So all of my peers, we are Gen Z, we are 20-something, right? And we're navigating these new questions that we've never had to do before, which is like, how are we going to afford rent? How are we going to afford food? Am I ever going to be able to buy a house? I don't know. Can I retire early? Probably not, right? So we're all navigating these things. And yet when I'm with my peers and we're talking about these things, I think there's a very overall rhetoric around hope and strength and perseverance, which you need to be able to get through the job market right now, right? Like I have 4 jobs, including this job, to be able to afford to live in Helena. And I applied for 126 jobs when I was trying to graduate college. And I think that that's a common experience for people my age. And, when you step back and you're navigating these hard things, if you can stand with hope and strength, that's really powerful. And then I get the great privilege of working here, which is where I get to take my skill set, which is social media, which, is probably something you would attribute to young people, right? Navigating Facebook, Instagram, whatever. And I get to platform older Montanans' ideas and views. And I think when you can combine the wisdom and the experience of older people with the skill set and the language of someone who's younger, you can do the best work. So I'm very happy to work for Big Sky. It's fantastic.
I'm really happy to welcome Alex DuBois to Billings. She jumped in her car with her family in Butte this morning and drove across a couple of passes and through some big winds to be here with us. Alex discovered that she has a passion for early childhood education while she was working in a part-time child care position during college. She was inspired by the critical development that happens for children in their early years. She pursued a degree in early childhood education. With that firsthand experience, including as a parent, Alex has become really committed to improving Montana's early childhood system. She has worked in various roles. She's been a preschool teacher and supported child care professionals in her current role, which is an advocate for policies and solutions that will strengthen families, educators, and communities. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Margie, and yes, just holler if you can't hear me. I can be a quiet talker. I'm so honored to be here today with in this room of wisdom, so much wisdom. Like Margie said, I work for 0 to 5 Montana. We're an advocacy organization, and we really focus on kids 0 to 5. But when you talk about kids 0 to 5, you also have to talk about their families, right? So we really take a look at what families are experiencing and then craft solutions that really help support them. As mentioned in my bio, I found my role as an advocate because I was teaching young children and I was a mom myself, and I loved the work that I was doing. 90% of the brain is developed before the age of 5. I was fascinated by that statistic. It's such important, it's like the most important years for development, right? And I was working and trying to raise my own child, and I couldn't make ends meet doing the work that I was doing. So I realized there was something wrong with the childcare, the early education system, that it wasn't working for families and it wasn't working for the providers or the educators that are working hard each day. Now I get to advocate at the state level to really improve the childcare system and help families where I can. But the reality is that there's so much to do. And there's not lost hope there. So, parents have a hard job. It's so beautiful to raise children. It's the snuggles, it's the first steps. It's also the tantrums and the never-ending viruses. And my youngest just entered kindergarten, so I'm fresh out of the early years. And it's hard. It's hard to afford childcare. On average, childcare costs $18,000 a year for families. That's a lot of money. That's more than college tuition sometimes. So, and then across Montana, we also have the challenge that there's just not enough early education or childcare available. We're only meeting about 46% of the estimated demand. So families are having to make hard decisions, whether that's piecing together care with grandparents or, removing themselves from the workforce, even if they don't want to. So there's a lot there. But I think it's important to think about how our generations do intersect and how, we're all working together to really care for our youngest citizens, really, in Montana. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad you mentioned that. It just completely gobsmacked me a year or so ago when someone said that for a parent of a 3 or a 4-year-old to get them into basically good quality, licensed, certified childcare, you're talking $18,000 a year. And that's just mind-boggling. So there's a lot of work we all need to pitch in on, I think, in that regard. I'm really pleased to be able to welcome Luke Ashmore. Some of you around Billings may know and recognize that Luke is one of our newest School District 2 board members. Yeah, thank you. Those are long, hard meetings. He grew up in Billings. He is a graduate of Billings West High School. He's coached soccer, and he works at Zoo, Montana, which, by the way, if it weren't so darn windy, we would hope you'd get out there and take a walk. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. But I do want to say that when Luke was a candidate, and as Terry mentioned, we are committed to all ages, to lifting up the community of all generations. And so we have found it, possible to endorse really good candidates in a few communities around Montana and help them in small ways as volunteers and maybe mailers and letting our members know that a good person is running. And we were able to interview and endorse Luke, and we're so excited to see him run and win. And I will tell you, I went back and we looked up the numbers of that school board election a year ago in Billings last spring, I think it was. Is that correct? And it's a low turnout election. 73% of the voters in that school board election were 55 plus. So there's definitely some good that we can do as voters, and to be mindful of the power that we have and the importance that it is for young Montanans to have people pay attention who are voting in those, and we want to help you find good candidates. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Luke.
How's everyone doing today? Good. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invite and the kind introduction. I guess, using your metaphor, I'm a little bit further down the river than Sofie. I am the millennial representative here today. But I do want to say this too. As I've grown in my life and my career, I think I've realized that the generational divide, when you're connecting with people who matter, it doesn't really exist. Some of the kindest, hardest working, most influential people in my life were actually a group of volunteers at the Billings Visitor Center at the Chamber of Commerce. Has anybody been there? So that was my first job. I worked in the travel and tourism industry. I actually spent a lot of time in this room talking to groups, but it was about travel and tourism. And I think I found my footing in my career by being like the most positive person about Billings possible. Don't get me wrong, as a city, we do have some problems, but we have amazing things to celebrate and we have amazing people here. And so that's what I tried to latch on to. But one of the reasons I'm sitting here in front of you today is my work on the school board. After the last federal election, I imagine, like many of you, there was a mixture of emotions. For me, it was a level of trepidation, being absolutely frightened out of my mind, but it gave me some energy too. I needed to, well, I'm going to use your quote. It was beautiful earlier, but action is the remedy for, what'd you say? Despair. Sorry for the paraphrase, but that's the feeling that I had. I looked at myself and I thought, okay, I could try to change people's mind in Facebook comments, or I could actually help my community. And that's what I'm trying to inspire others to do by focusing on local issues. I don't really want to be a school board trustee who's focused on the sexy culture war issues. If those come to the table, we'll have those conversations. But I want to talk about infrastructure, providing for our students, and making sure that in Billings and across the state, younger generations have what they need. Because I think we're dealing with a lot of problems in today's world. I don't think we're going to get through this without directly giving the generations, even underneath my generation, as much support as possible. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm drinking through a fire hose currently with the school board, but it's been a great learning experience, and I'm happy to talk about it today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Luke. And last but not least, I'm happy to welcome Representative Melody Cunningham. She wears many hats. She's also a physician, Dr. Melody Cunningham from Missoula. And I got the privilege of working with her as our lobbyist in Helena in 2025, where she was a freshman lawmaker. And a freshman is hardly the word for Melody. She seemed to just immediately rise to the top in terms of someone who mastered the job description and did an awesome job. But let me just tell you a little bit about where she's coming from, and then she will take us from there. Melody graduated in literature from Wellesley College. She practiced medicine as a pediatric oncologist and then developed a special practice helping children and families who are receiving palliative care. She was elected to serve in the Montana House of Representatives in 2024 and now serves on the Interim Children and Families Committee. She also landed on probably one of the toughest committees in terms of challenging culture war issues and constitution challenges and criminal justice and everything else. Every morning at 8 o'clock, she was in the House Judiciary Committee, and honestly, she should probably get a medal, a bronze medal for that. I know it well because I spent 12 years on the Judiciary Committee, and I thank you, Melody, for being there. But we worked with Melody on a bill that she crafted, having knocked on doors diligently as a candidate, and how many low-income seniors' homes that she knocked on, and realized how many people are living almost entirely on Social Security, which is a pretty minimal revenue stream, if that's all you're getting, or a little tiny pension. And so she crafted a really good bill that we felt very positive about joining in and standing up for, and she'll tell you about it. But I think we both, at the end, were chagrined to see it didn't pass. It was voted on about 5 times in the last 48 hours. I think it died on a tie. She'll tell you the story. But we also knew that some of our friends were just feeling like, oh, if we vote for this, then we may lose funding for early childhood. Turns out it didn't pass, but then we lost the funding for the early childhood teachers as well. So that's what really sparked the idea that we just have to join forces and be stronger together. So with all that, I'm sorry, Melody, I hope I didn't steal your speech, but please take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is on. Yes, I'm Melody Cunningham. Never in a million years did I think I would run for office. I spent 30 years in medicine, first in pediatrics, pediatric oncology, made my way across the country, went to Memphis, Tennessee, where I developed a pediatric hospice and palliative care program, inpatient and outpatient, and learned an enormous amount from that as I was advocating with families for what they wished for their children. The path to coming to politics started with the ballot initiative in 2022, which stated that any child born alive must receive all reasonable and appropriate life-preserving measures. Well, anyone in medicine or who has intersected the medical field personally knows that reasonable and appropriate are incredibly gray and personal terms. So that was the first piece that struck me. Anyone who did not provide that at the bedside, from respiratory therapist all the way up to physician, or physician all the way up to respiratory therapist, however we prioritize the needs, would be at risk of felony charges with up to 20 years in prison and or $50,000 fine, and had no stipulation for parents who knew their infant wasn't going to survive. And that, knowing that I had been at the bedside with truly hundreds of families saying goodbye to their infant, who they knew was going to not survive hours or days or months, whatever period of time, they didn't want those painful things done to their child. So that gave me my voice, and I did a lot of knocking for 3 particular candidates, not myself, in 22. And I would say, well, that was about Willis. Could I share something from my work, from Melody's work? And there was only one man that said no to me, because generally people don't say no when we ask permission. And he was in the middle of a football game. So I didn't take that personally. And so I was able to explain what the consequences of that would be. And I had quite a number of people say, I'm a lifelong Republican, pro-life voter, and I'm going to vote no on this, and, thank you. And a young person who said, I wasn't even going to, go and vote, but I'll go and vote just because I want to vote against this ballot initiative. Don't know if he did, but I left the door with a bit of spring in my step after that. And then in 23, I went to Helena, and with a quake in my voice that became less and less over the session, testified on bills around kids' health care and education in particular. And then in the next session, there was an open seat in Missoula, and people encouraged me to run. And so I ran. I did have a primary, and I'll share probably in the next iteration my communication superpower that I think I have, and you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong or medium, and went through the primary, received 83% of the vote in the primary, I think because of knocking more than 4,000 doors. Thank you. And being completely positive. When someone would ask who else was running, I'd say she's a first grade school teacher. You will really like her if you meet her. Could I share with you why I think my voice will be particularly effective? And I let them know that there was not a single physician in the House or the Senate, and presently I'm the only physician of the 150 people, and hopefully I will be back to do that again. So that's sort of the path to that. I do think my superpower is communication after 15 years of pediatric hospice and palliative medicine in a disenfranchised population in Memphis, Tennessee, and before that, taking care of kids and their families with cancer. So I will circle back to that, but thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Oh, and the story about the Social Security bill circles into communication. So I say that as a freshman in the minority party, I passed 3.9 bills. So 3 bills passed into law. The 0.9 is the Social Security bill that did die on a tie on third reading in the Senate. a particular story about that. Senator McGilvery spoke at second reading and said, this is the richest generation. They do not need this. And we are one of only 8 states in the country that taxes income tax on Social Security. And so I wrote him a little postcard that I left on his desk and said, for the single people, this level is still $4,000 annual below the Montana mean or median, excuse me, and then 22,000 below for couples. He voted yes on the third reading. And so those handwritten notes are an incredible piece of communication for this baby boomer. Thank you.
The way we're going to do this is we're going to go back through and engage the panel a little bit more, because we asked them to kind of dig a little deeper into where they're coming from and what kind of the angle at which they enter the river or the place in the river. But Melody just mentioned a couple things that were superpowers. One was just a work ethic, and that's not unique to any generation, but obviously Melody going out there and knocking on 4,000 doors is a superpower. I have a feeling Luke did something similar in his race, but I'm wondering if you would be willing to share some things you think, and I won't call you by name, just raise your hand and jump in. Some things you think that your particular entry into history gives you some perspective or some knowledge or some experience that helps lift all the boats that we all need from you and your peers as a generation. And I guess one of the things that I have been thinking about a lot, for instance, from the generation into which I was born in Montana, is that when I was just getting out of college and really beginning to the dawn of kind of awareness about what's going on around me in the world, Montana was discussing and adopting a new constitution. And so people in my generation got the benefit and the joy of voting for a new constitution that did a whole bunch of things that turned this state around in so many ways. Open doors, made government, open and accessible to people, that insisted on fundamental freedoms and dignity, privacy for people. We adopted an extraordinary constitution that has in many ways been a gift and shaped our lives, and maybe a gift to the world, really. And we'll hear a lot more about that when Nancy Leifer gives her talk tomorrow. It's really exciting and interesting. But that being said, I'm wondering if any of you wants to share some things you think come from, the millennial or the Gen Z or the Gen whatever that that you feel kind of identify with, and feel free to raise your hand, and we'll kind of pass it back and forth and talk a little bit about what those strengths are, and then maybe come back around to how that can be used as, a power up to build power and win together and build connections with each other. So with that, any takers? Thank you, Luke.
That on now? Perfect. That's a great question. Thank you. I've described this to other people in my life, and some chats leading into this panel, we discussed this too. But as a millennial, in terms of, I guess, the generational view, I think what millennials are in an interesting spot where we kind of got to see the old world and the new world, especially when it comes to jobs and some societal systems that have changed in recent years. I think for me, that line in the sand was the COVID pandemic. Up until that point, I was in a really standard kind of office environment. My career trajectory, I thought, was going to be, I'm going to be 20 years somewhere. And then in 2021, it's like, nope, that's not happening. What is a job? What's a career? And I had some really tough conversations with myself and other people my age who kind of became disillusioned with that. And I will say this too, I think there's a level of envy from people my age where we look at generations that came before us, and to have that solidity in career and community, I think it's people my age are searching for, and it's something that I want to try to hopefully bring back.
Thank you, Luke. You know, I have to say, from raising a couple young adults who were millennials, one of the things that I saw happen to them is, you know, they hit the job market at about the time the economy crashed in 2008. Then they sort of start to get their legs under them, and COVID came along. And I think they came forward with a lot of hope and a lot of positivity and a lot of energy, and I'm thankful so many of them are still pitching away, so I'm grateful. Did someone else have some thoughts about their generational superpower? Alex?
I just want to build upon that. I think the other thing that I'm also a millennial, that we saw with COVID is that it really opened the door for millennials to think about kind of raising kids a little bit differently. It opened the door for flexible working environments and to have employers be a little more family friendly. And it also really brought to light the absolute critical importance of childcare. And I think for our economy, right? It's the workforce behind the workforce. And I think millennials really opened their eyes to a lot of that stuff and have found a lot of hope in kind of making positive change in our state. And I think that's really exciting.
We need that energy. Yeah.
Thinking about COVID, for Gen Z people, it was actually before we entered the workforce while we were in school. And we all went through it, right? Like, you have no in-person socialization. And for people my age, that means that you spent a lot of time online, right? And online, social media, whatever, browsing the internet does not make up for in-person connections. However, I think a strength that we have is that now that we are being able to provide our skills to organizations like this one, or Forward Montana that's completely made up of young people, we can take our mass amount of time online and be able to kind of translate that into reaching a broader audience. So like, I can post from Helena, I post our platform, our messages from Helena, and I'm able to reach all the corners of Montana, plus whoever wants to see what we're saying. And, you know, social media is, you know, can have some very severe negatives, but for the workforce and what we can bring, I think it's very positive. Like, you can reach a broad audience. Like, we were able to reach all of you probably because you saw our emails or our social media, or, you know, there's also mailers and things like that. But it is interesting. I think COVID like really changed what people can bring to the table.
Will you indulge me in a few slides because I like visuals?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, please.
All right. So my communication approach, and it's partly when I've approached doors for other candidates and for myself, is about listening and being personal. And I would knock on the door and I would simply say, I'm Melody. I'm running for the House of Representatives in Helena, because a lot of people confuse federal and state. And I would say, if I get elected to serve, always using the word serve, because I hate the word win, what's important to you? And then I would stop talking. And it was amazing how many people opened up. And there's a little app where I was facile enough to dictate what they had to say. And the next morning I wrote them a postcard thank you note. And I think that those things really resonated with people. I don't do those shiny door hangers. They don't recycle very well. They get torn off of the the door handle and thrown in the wastebasket for the most part. So I'll show you something in a minute, but it was a piece of paper that said, who am I, why am I running? And allowed me to write some personal notes on them. And I taped them to the window. Realized that they at least saw it for a few seconds when they were untaping it, which was not my intent, but that was an outcome. So the personalized information at the door, so this is the top of my sheet, and Diane Sands, thank you, told me that you fold it so that your picture and your logo are front and center. And I signed a bunch of them ahead of time when I knew that there would be people not home. I hope we'll meet in person someday soon. Sorry I missed you. Please feel free to reach out, Melody. And then at the top, I would notice something on their lawn or their door, and I would comment on it. Took me about 5 seconds to write that in. And you can see on this one, I was met at the door by your canine chorus. Here's a response to personalization. So these folks had a carved eagle. Thank you for running for House District 97. We look forward to your representation. Sorry we missed you when you came by. Your personal handwritten note about our carved eagle was refreshing. Nice addition to the flyer you left. We'd like to support you with the enclosed contribution of $25. Also, we would welcome a Melody for Montana sign in our yard. How do we get one? You have our vote. It took me 5 seconds to write those, and it gave me hope and clearly gave other folks hope. What about trespassing, soliciting, and private road signs? So a lot of people say, well, we're not soliciting, we're giving information. Well, I feel like if someone has a sign about soliciting on their door, they want privacy, and I need to respect that. So I didn't approach any of those doors. The next morning, I wrote a note and mailed my information. And I would say, I saw your sign about trespassing, so I'm mailing my info. Feel free to reach out. I didn't use the word no trespassing. I put it in a different way because I wanted to avoid any negative word. My husband thinks I'm a little over the top about that, but that's who I is. Response to respecting signs. Dear Melody, and this was in pencil that they sent this to me. Thanks for stopping by our home to introduce yourself. KB and I were both shocked you respected the privacy sign. We said that alone would get our vote. You can absolutely count on 2 votes for this election. And I've shared this. I've now met with about 15 candidates for municipal, those are passed, and legislative races to share my strategy where I threw the old rules out the door because I didn't like them. So what about disagreeable doors? So humor. So this is a picture of a dirt road in St. Ignatius. I went to St. Ignatius in 22 for another candidate. Went up to a home and said, "Oh, Monica would like to hear what's on your mind." "I don't want to talk." Just sort of shrugged my shoulders, and then he's like, "Well, maybe Frank does." And Frank clearly was his father, who was probably 70, ambles over and he says, "So, about this abortion thing, when a boy, where's the responsibility? When a boy and a girl are in the back of a car," and it just sort of flew out of my mouth. I said, "Or in a field," and suddenly, like he kind of smiled, knew he wasn't going to scare me away, and they had a 20-minute conversation with me. And the older man said, "Well, she's here, she's listening to us." So I think that those things are really important for us. What about disagreeable doors? So why do I have a Tim Sheehy sign up here? So a number of us were standing at where Sheehy was speaking, and we were opposed to his women's rights stance. A man across the street got a big Sheehy sign and was across the street from us. When we finished, I went over and I just said, "Oh, clearly you like him. Would you share with me why you do?" And he said, "Values." That led to a conversation. And then a couple days later, he emailed me on my email account and asked me to go for a moo latte at Dairy Queen, which I didn't know they existed, but now I do. And at that conversation, he said, "Do you have a group of Republicans for Melody? Because I support what you're doing." So these are just some, I think for a lot of you, they're probably not new. We learned these things as we went through lots of years. Another disagreeable door. I went to a door and said, "What's important?" "The border." And so I knew that the bipartisan bill federally had been voted down. And I just said, I could be wrong, but I seem to remember that there was a bipartisan bill, and, does this ring a bell to you? But wasn't it voted down by Republicans? And so I didn't get any hard pushback, and she sort of looked a little puzzled. Don't know what she did with that information afterwards, but I feel like that's a way of planting a seed without saying, oh, by the way, you're wrong because it was voted down by your party. Closing loop, handwritten thank you note postcard. This is my logo, but it's also what's on my postcard. And the next morning, I wrote a postcard or sent messages to those who had trespassing, soliciting, or private road signs. I did about 2,000 of those. I'm getting trigger finger surgery in about a week, probably because of all those notes. But anyway, I think that probably a lot of that personal touch is not new for all of you, and I think that, along with our electronic and reaching farther with social media, are wonderful touches. Thank you for indulging me with slides.
We're going to open it up out to the room in just a minute, but I want to give, first of all, anyone else on the panel, both, especially Luke and Alex, you are representing constituencies in education and in early childhood. Just a real high-level overview of the challenges that you are facing and the work you are doing on behalf of our Montanans in public education and our young parents. A couple more details about the kinds of bills you maybe had advanced or the kinds of things we're seeing coming forward in what you're seeing coming at us in the upcoming legislature, if you wouldn't mind.
I'll jump in from more of the school board perspective, I guess, in Billings, but I know this is happening across the state. And so in the intro, I mentioned culture war issues. I feel like those are being brought to the table, but I think for me, it's a matter of having those conversations around the dinner table first. I really am focused and worried about a few issues I'm seeing across the state, and one of the biggest things is infrastructure with our schools. Here in Billings, we have facilities that are more than 100 years old. And this is even a bigger issue than just Montana. Across the country, I don't believe we've truly invested frequently the resources we need to make sure our buildings provide for our students. So for example, anybody here a West High grad? You know of West High, thank you, me too. But I use this as an example where this school was built in the 50s. There's no AC, and right now it's actually at a point that certain classrooms, the ratio of students to teachers is 30-1. And don't get me wrong, the teachers in those classrooms are working their butts off. But I think as a community and as a state, we're going to reach some limits when it comes to just physical infrastructure. But also, there's a huge worry about it. Where do you get the funding? What do you guys think should always be tied to our property? I struggle with that too. And that's a problem we have to solve. We go back 20 years in the mid-2000s, operational levies, bonds were much more likely to pass. Is that the case today? I don't think so. And I'm not going to rally against anybody for voting against those things either. If you're on a fixed income or a low income, I totally understand it. And so I think for me in the seat that I sit in, I also need to be talking to leaders in the state in terms of, can we look at a new funding formula? Can we just look at a way to really make sure students have what they need? And also, we're just being mindful of everybody's checkbook. Sorry for a little bit of the rambling there, but I hope that helped.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and then we'll give Sofie the last word.
Yeah, I think it's similar in a way. As a state, we really need to invest quite a significant amount of money into supporting families with young children and the early educators that are caring for those kids. We have challenges with recruitment and retention of the workforce that's caring for children, and at the end of the day, it's just too expensive for families. Thank you. And so, yeah, just butting up against the actual need for investment, some significant investment. I think we've done some really exciting things. Last session, we passed a bill that created the Early Childhood Special Revenue Account, and that's the first time that our state has really significantly put some state dollars towards supporting childcare and early childhood, so that's really exciting. The other thing, we, as a state, almost passed a state child tax credit, which would give some financial relief for families, whether that's for food, childcare bill, whatever they need. And so I think there's some opportunity for sure. But yeah, we'll have to chip away at it.
Thank you. So be thinking about what raising your hand and commenting or reflecting in a minute, but we're going to give Sofie a chance to reflect a little bit about where some of the tensions and conflicts come as well. Is that?
Yeah. I think this panel, cross-generational, how are we going to tackle all of these issues together? We're stronger together, right? And when we look at our sister organization, Forward Montana, basically the complete opposite of us, right? We need to work with those people, the younger people, and they need to work with us as well. And I think a lot of the rhetoric when people my age refer to baby boomers, or when I hear people who are baby boomers, Gen X, referring to people who are younger, it's very antagonizing, blaming each other, right? Like, we're not going to have Social Security, or the economy's failing, and we're blaming all of the different generations that came before us. And I think that that's very limiting, and we're not going to get very far. And all of these issues, they span across generations. And so for us to move forward, as we should, I think we should look more kindly on each other and realize that we can all help each other with our different sets of skills and our different approaches to things.
I think, as I mentioned, one of the purposes of this panel isn't to be in a kind of a bitch and moan session. It's to look for bridge building, look for synergy, look for partnerships, be creative, think about our superpowers. And so my charge to you and to this room is, as these gracious and wonderful folks have been sharing from their hearts and their perspectives, what are you thinking? What are you experiencing? What are you seeing from where you live and grandparent and observe the world, or wherever your stance is in relation to the world? And Trent has got a mic, and we are going to ask you to wait until he arrives so that you can speak into the mic and everyone can hear you. And there are folks back home who are also listening. So I welcome you to raise your hand. Jock. I know a lot of the names in this room, but sometimes I get them wrong.
Good morning, I'm Jacques Quanbeck, or it's the afternoon, I guess. I attended Broadwater School, and in some history class, I was shocked to find out that there were people in the United States who did not have access to the same drinking fountains that I had access to. And this was just a huge shock to me as a Montanan in the 40s and early 50s. I was able to cast my first vote for John Kennedy. And after college, I ended up teaching in East Africa. I lived on Mount Kilimanjaro. And what was so interesting was seeing the values of these students from the culture that they were in. And we had a study hall every evening from 7 to 8:30. And then we as teachers would ask them to close up and get ready and go to their dormitories to get ready for bed. And every time I went to close it down, students would say, "Can't we study just a little bit longer?" When I came back, I taught in suburban Minneapolis and the inner city of Chicago, and ended up finally at a high school without walls where students took classes all over the city from all sorts of professionals. And it has been very interesting to watch what has happened with those students, a multicultural plethora of students. So I gained so much from that experience and the world that we lived in along the river at that time. And it has impacted my whole life as I have continued. And it is so different from what is being promulgated these days. And I think we have a challenge on our hands.
Does anyone want to respond from the panel to that perspective and journey? Luke?
And when you say Broadwater, is that Broadwater Elementary? My mom taught there for years. I love that school. It's good to hear. I loved your comment about that cultural diversity piece too. And I think for us in this room, it's something we need to be mindful of. It's the Montana Constitution. I have to remind people in our lives where we have a rich cultural tapestry right here in our state. Our tribal communities, their history, their traditions, we can learn from that. And so I think I've got a lot of supporters in this room when it comes to the Montana Constitution. But something I'm mindful of is if I hear people want to take some of those things away, it's a huge worry, because I think right now it's one of the best state constitutions across the country because it protects those cultural aspects too.
Thank you, Luke. That Montana Constitution had a requirement of Indian education for all, and that doesn't mean just, although this is critical, education for all people who are Native Americans, who are Indian. It also means every classroom, every student in Montana is entitled to know about the indigenous Indian peoples of this place that some of our more recent ancestors arrived in. And I think do we have somebody who is up for a question? Okay, go ahead. And speak into the mic and try and be as succinct as you can so that we can get a couple. There's starting to be a queue. That's good.
Sure, Steve Held, and I've got a ton of stuff to say about Africa and Billings. I brought my kids here, Ricky and Yeager, to go to school in Billings, so I've got a lot of talking to you guys about. When I go around and talk to people around the state, which I do all the time, I'm seeing over and over that the things that the younger people are wanting to do, Mondami or wherever you are around the state, are so similar to what we were trying to do in the 60s and what the other folks around here are doing. I would love to hear from any or all of you about the things you see in common with the people around the state of Montana, Republican and Democrat, young and old. I would like to hear some positive things about what we can do and where we can go.
Great. Thank you, Steve. That's a great lead-in. Any takers? Melody's going to jump in.
I've got a quick one on that. Thank you, Mr. Held. So I have traveled around the state now twice, went as far as Plentywood from Missoula, so a good number of miles on my little outback. And I was in Glasgow and saw these two older men, and I thought, I bet they think differently than me, but I'm going to go and ask them for a restaurant recommendation and start a conversation, which I did. And then that conversation led into, what things are you concerned about? And they said childcare. And it was so heartening and hopeful to hear that from folks that I didn't, if I looked at the book and the cover and didn't take my blinders off my eyes, I wouldn't have anticipated.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else in the panel want to jump in on that?
I just want to make a note. I totally agree. I think across the board, we want families to be able to live and raise their own family here and stay in Montana. They want to stay in Montana. A lot of my generation struggles, and we want to keep them here. So childcare is a huge one.
If I may take the liberty of having a mic, the issue that I think really spans the generations is affordable housing. We're seeing 75-year-old veterans out on the street. We are seeing brand new, fresh college graduates getting out of college and not being able to put a roof over their heads unless they hold down 4 jobs in order to afford rent in places like Helena or Missoula or Billings or Bozeman. So I thought I saw Dr. For Julia had her hand up. Did you have someone else in the queue? Okay, all right.
Okay, so I'm Rich Gessling. I live in Roberts, Montana, and I was raised to respect everybody by my parents, and that's what they talked to me, and I think that's the biggest problem we have right now and it's very difficult to respect everybody. I have to tell myself every day, and I catch myself getting pissed off, but I've got to respect, we're all human beings. We all have the same needs, and we all need to come together and solve these problems, and we've got to respect each other. And this name calling and all this stuff, don't get caught up in it. Don't, just quit. Just say, let's just talk. Let's just get together, okay?
Thank
Thank
you.
you. I think
Thank
it's-
you, Rich. Yeah, those are good words. They have it, we have it, we're at each other's throats in this country, and I think part of the superpower that I hope this whole room brings to this is respect and listening and the kinds of things that we've heard this panel talk about. Dr. Faguglia.
It's just Jeanette.
Jeanette.
First thing I want to say is Sofie was one of my superstars at Carroll College, so give it up for Sofie. I love all my children equally, but I have a few that, they're a little more equal. This is sort of a recommendation, and I think Sofie can probably remember. For every one of you out there of a certain age, go to your local community college, go to your local university, go wherever you are, and audit a class with these young people. And if you want to see a better way, there is no better way to bridge that gap. And they all learn from each other. And God rest his soul, Chuck Johnson, for any of you knew him in his fight for the Montana Constitution, he took a bunch of classes, and I think Sofie was in maybe one of those. And everybody wins. And we all develop a really interesting understanding of where everyone's coming from. So go out there, and you don't have to do any work at all. You just have to appear.
Thank you. Is it Jennifer? Jeanette, thank you. And I'm going to let Sofie get a word in edgewise here.
I will say that when I was at Carroll, most of the history classes I took had like 3 people auditing, and I loved the discussion. It was awesome. There's some classes where it's built on discussion, and we would all read the books together, and I get to know my peers that come in at the same time as me, and then there's someone who's like the age of my mom or something, and they come in and we all discuss together, and it's quite awesome, right? And I also work at the Myrna Loy if you're in Helena, and that crowd that goes into the Myrna Loy is also a bit older, and I get to see my peers from Carroll who are auditors come in, and I get to discuss with them further, and it's fantastic. It's one of my favorite parts of being at Carroll.
Quick question, is it free? Or do you need to sign up or do something?
Sign up, it's not free, but it's nominal.
Okay, thank you.
Not free, but nominal for the
Let's
people
see,
that are online.
We're
that can't
down to
hear.
maybe the last 1 or 2, and then we're going to let Corbin come forward.
I think I really appreciated our 3rd grade experience because my teacher was part Indian. And unbeknownst to probably the established educational BEAs or whatever, excuse me, she's taught, but when she taught these standard curriculum, she modified it and taught kind of what the Indians taught. So we got 2 culture through the whole year. And it was very good because a lot of people, I know the parents, a lot of us students were worried about if they got, when we had parent test stuff, how their parents were going to react because they're used to their parents saying, drunken or something like all these comments. But once they got to meet her and her husband, they said, this does not fit the stereotype. And that's when we found out how to break that kind of mindset.
Thank you so much. Thank you. One last question, I think, Santa, and then we will make one more announcement, and then we'll have our wonderful poet fan.
Thanks, and thank all of you panelists for everything you have shared today. I just was struck by what Sofie referred to. Others have, excuse me, also referred to this as well. I feel it's important to recognize that there is a concerted effort to pit generations against each other, to make us disrespect each other, to foster that sense of, the older generation has all these things and we'll never have it. That's a concerted effort, and I think it's so important to recognize that. And on the issue of respect, I have this sense that I need to learn more. I used to get really ticked off when I would hear young people talk about this, do the whole okay boomer thing, It's like, that is so disrespectful. But I'm much more interested now, and I'd like to hear from any of you, how do I demonstrate my respect for younger generations in Montana?
This will be a lightning round. Any takers?
I think just like at the doors, listening and asking questions with true curiosity.
I think when I'm talking to people in my family who are older, and honestly, before I had this job, I never interacted with people who were much older than me besides those in my family. And I think that we just don't really listen to each other. It's like this divide that's like, oh, well, those are the grandkids and those are the grandparents. Like, obviously, we're going to think differently. But I've had conversations with my grandparents, especially since starting this job. And I think once you listen to each other, you realize that both of you have good ideas. You both are capable and intelligent. And I think really, as Dr. Cunningham said, it's listening.
Luke, oh, yeah.
Briefly to that, but thank you for mentioning there is a level of that being so manufactured. I think there is that conservative effort to divide us on any grounds possible. It can be generation, skin color, religion, sexuality. We have so much more in common than we have different. And so in terms of, I think, bridging that gap, it's doing what you're doing, what we're doing here today. We're spending time in each other's company and we're having good conversations. That's where it starts.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel. You guys are wonderful. Would you please give them a big round of applause?